I make the handles, I make the ferrules, I laminate the steels, I forge weld, and they're all labors of love, and I'd love to show you a little bit more about them, get into the details. Hi, I'm Nick Rolin. I'm the bladesmith behind Rolin Knives. I have a bunch of knives that are going to be for sale here at Bernal Cutlery. A little bit about myself. I grew up here in San Francisco, started working in restaurants, worked in the service and hospitality industry for a very long time, and while I was doing that, kind of fell into bladesmithing. I've been doing it now for about 8 years, the past 2 full-time, and I make knives designed for the kitchen. Try to make them as functional and as beautiful as I can so that they're things that you want to use, and I believe that handmade tools enrich our lives. The value goes beyond the function, even though these are designed to be the best performing tools I can possibly make. Everything is forged almost entirely by hand in my workshop. I use carbon low alloy steel and I grind them to have, again, the best performance that I'm able to provide. Ease of cutting, edge stability, food release, and sharpen-ability. And I work with a bunch of different steels to serve different purposes, and also because I just love experimenting with different steels. And I focus on 3 different kinds of finishes primarily. Forged finish knives are ones that are a little bit more rustic, leave a lot of forged texture, and a lot of the geometry is done with a hammer. Konyaki knives, or differentially heat-treated knives, that are fully polished and have a convex grind. And then messing around with more kind of nerdy grinds like a compound grind or a S grind for increased food release. So like a ton of knife makers, I started out in kitchens, became obsessed with the quality of my tools, and always collected high quality knives or old knives that I found and restored. And I've been coming to Bernal Cutlery for a very long time and drooling over knives. When I make knives, there are certain things I look for, but the primary thing is function and like a clean finish. All of my knives have a very pronounced distal taper, or a taper from the handle down to the tip. This provides like really great weight distribution, a sense of balance. It also helps with food release, because when you're cutting through an ingredient and you have kind of a changing shape of the blade, things tend to fall off more easily. So ease of cutting and food release are a huge part of my testing process. Every time I forge a knife and grind it, it comes into the kitchen with me for usually a week or 2 without a handle, and I'll use it. I'll take it back to the stones, refine the shape, use it again until I get it somewhere where I'm happy with it. Then I polish it up, put a handle on it, test it again, and then it's good to go out the door. I make the handles, I make the ferrules, I laminate the steels, I forge weld, and they're all labors of love, and I'd love to show you a little bit more about them, get into the details. My approach with making kitchen knives is to use as many traditional techniques as I can, and that makes sense, and marry them with some modern techniques and modern tools. So I take a lot of my inspiration from Japanese production processes, and then I also use some Western techniques and tools and materials. All of my knives are forged. And if there's a forge welding step, that's done at fairly high heat. And then after that, after I've welded a billet together, and then I've drawn it out and forged the knife shape, I lower the temperature significantly. And in doing so, I get a jump start on grain refinement, and I keep my grains small, and I'm also minimizing grain growth with, mechanical shrinkage by hammering, by forging. And I reduce the heat, and I basically get it so that the last few heats I'm forging at as low a heat I can get away with to refine the surface texture, the grain, and from there I'll go to my kiln, my very precise, expensive kiln, and I will do some more thermal cycling, normalizing, grain refinement, and annealing. After I anneal, I do some cold work on these knives. If they are a laminate and clad with something soft and malleable, I do some cold forging to, again, compress the cladding, get a better surface texture, and also to create what are called nucleation points in the steel, so that when it's heated up, that carbon goes into solution and is ready for the quench. And I've done it without the cold forging before, and I really like the results I get from the cold forging. And on mono steels, I will cold forge too, just much more gently, and I'll do a little bit of straightening that way. Then I'll go and I'll quench most of the time into Parks 50 oil, or like the fastest oil I can get. Very, very rarely will there be a water quench. Most things are quenched in Parks 50. And then from there, they're tempered so I can get to my target hardness. And I grind with water-cooled grinding. So I can grind and have ground for years without the help of water to cool the knives, just by being very careful, but it's a slow process and it's annoying. And since I've added water-cooled grinding, I've gotten much faster and I don't have to worry about ruining the temper on my blades. Most blades are hand finished and hand sanded. Some of them I'll leave a machine finish on every now and then, and there's an art to that and there's an aesthetic appeal to that too. But a lot of the time I'll move to hand sanding. And one of my main focuses during the forging process is to get as nice a taper in there as possible that I can with a hammer, especially if I'm leaving a forge finish. If I'm doing something where I'm going to completely polish it and remove all the forge scale, like a Honyaki blade, when I forge it, I leave it a little bit chunkier. And then after annealing, so after all the thermal cycles, I will basically shape the knife about 85% of the way, heat treat it, fix any warps if that's necessary, and then polish it up. But even completely clean blades are forged to shape. I use modern handles in the sense that they're pretty much all stabilized wood. Either I buy them stabilized or I send them out for stabilization, or I use woods that are naturally stable, like this Argentine lignum vitae. And this way I don't have to worry about, water in kitchen environments destroying these handles. I also use marine quality epoxy to secure the blades in the handles. It's 24-hour epoxy, so it takes a lot of time, but it has a very strong cure and a very high tensile strength. Also, it has a lot of flex in it, and this means that through changes in moisture, the natural abuse that a knife will undergo, I don't have to worry about the glue cracking and snapping, which is something that you sometimes struggle with other glues. So again, all that is sort of for peace of mind for me and for whoever has the knife, that as long as you're taking care of the blade portion of the knife, the handle also is like stable and secure, and hopefully also beautiful. And I do all of the the machining of the metal parts myself as well. All right, let's start over here with this small chef's knife. This knife is forged out of a German steel called 1.2419.05, which I know is a mouthful, but it's basically a high carbon, high tungsten steel, and it makes fantastic chef's knives. This one I forged and also ground very, very thin. It has something called a Volkslift grind, which is essentially a convex grind, but continuing up towards the spine. So the thickest part of the knife is actually about 2/3 of the way up the knife, and then it gets thinner again towards the spine. It gives it sort of a upside down teardrop shape, and that helps with food release, the way that the blade travels through an ingredient and the way it actually lifts out of an ingredient. What I like to say is, like when you are cutting an onion, when you're dicing up an onion and the little bits of onion fly up, which is pretty annoying, this shape actually helps prevent that and makes it more fluid. The handle is a piece of stabilized spalted maple with a little G10 spacer at the top, and it has a maple saya or sheath with a brass pin. Another small chef's knife, like a nimble, low heel knife. This is a monosteel knife made of 52-100, just a perfect kind of small task knife. You could probably do almost anything with this knife, especially if you're someone who prefers a low heel, but very easy to use, nimble in the kitchen. Forged finish here, a spalted hackberry handle with a Rokaku Hanmaru shape, which is basically an octagon with a rounded bottom, or a shield shape. This is a 8.5-inch Honyaki, or a differentially heat-treated knife with W2. It's got a kind of flame-like hamon. Very polished, very thin. Also that Volkslift grind. This is a laser in the kitchen, kind of a perfect all-purpose kitchen knife, kind of my favorite size. The handle is made from stabilized curly walnut and curly maple with a brass spacer, and it also comes with a maple saya that actually has two different kinds of maple, just normal curly maple and then roasted curly maple, which is basically a high temperature treatment to stabilize the grain. Also a brass pin. Here's another Honyaki blade. Again, kind of a perfect all-around shape for me personally. Very clean bone line. The handle is made from Argentine lignum vitae, which is a naturally stable wood. It is naturally this kind of yellow to blue and green color. As it's exposed to light, it'll blue even more. It has a kind of textured copper ferrule that I make by hand, and I fit it up. It's known as heritage fit or museum fit, sometimes heirloom fit, different names for it, but essentially it's held together with hidden pins, and then I go back, disassemble it, and chamfer this little edge here. So in case there's any sort of change in the size of the wood, you won't get a sharp edge anywhere. And again, another bulk shift grind, or a kind of extended convex grind for ease of food release and cutting. And another curly maple saya, roasted maple and non-roasted maple, this time with a copper pin. This blade is a 5-layer or gomai blade that I forge welded myself. The core is the same steel as that first knife. It's 1.2419.05, which is a really wonderful abrasion resistant steel, but very easy to sharpen, surprisingly. The cladding is mild steel in 15N20, which is a high nickel content steel for a little bit of contrast. The handle is this very crazy, wacky piece of spalted maple, or I was told it's spalted maple. It doesn't look like any piece I've ever seen before. It has a lot of compression, a lot of kind of squirrely grain and spalting, but it's been stabilized and polished up. It's also got the heirloom fit with another textured copper ferrule. And this one also comes with a roasted maple saya. Oh, and this one has a very pronounced forged taper coming out at about 6 mil right out of the ferrule, tapering down to about 2.3 at the midpoint, and then about an inch from the tip, it's under 0.1, or under 1 rather, under 1 mil. And another copper pin. So this last knife here is a mono steel with a different grind style. It's called a compound grind or an S grind. And the idea behind this grind is to create an air pocket right here, which reduces the drag of a knife going through an ingredient and reduces the ingredient's ability to suction to the blade. So you can have a very sharp knife that's very thin, but if it's perfectly flat, it actually doesn't feel that sharp because of the amount of suction and drag. So all the grinds are designed in some way to limit that. And this one is with this hollow ground out. So that really aids in food production, and it shines on tall wet ingredients like potatoes and cucumbers and big carrots and stuff like that. And this knife also has the very strong forged distal taper like my other ones. The handle is made from 2 pieces of stabilized redwood, one piece that's a curly crosscut and the other that is a piece of burl. And yeah, and you can also see a little bit of carbide banding in this knife if you look closely, which is fun. Thanks for watching. If you've been watching this through this whole time and letting me ramble on, I'm really excited about these knives. It's a small slice of what I've been working on and what I make, and I'm really excited to show you more of the stuff I'm working on with Bernal Cutlery in the future. So thank you.